Samantha had always been careful about how she carried herself. She wasn't the type of woman to wear flashy clothes, but on that warm summer afternoon, the house was too quiet and the air was too heavy. She stood in her room, staring at her closet, searching for something light. Her hand brushed across an old denim miniskirt tucked in the corner, untouched for years. She pulled it out, hesitated for a second, then slipped it on with a simple blouse. When she looked into the mirror, she felt both strange and alive. It wasn't just about the clothes. It was about remembering that she was still herself, still a woman with a heartbeat, not just someone's aunt or someone's neighbor. The house creaked softly as she walked to the living room. The afternoon sun painted the furniture with golden light, and Samantha let herself breathe. She poured a glass of iced tea and leaned back, enjoying the rare stillness. She didn't know that the quiet moment was about to break. The front door opened without warning. She startled, almost spilling her drink. Her heart leaped before she realized it was Ethan, her nephew, standing there with a backpack slung over his shoulder. He had driven from college, his face carrying both exhaustion and the spark of youth. "Aunt Sam," he called out, smiling wide. His voice filled the house with sudden energy. Samantha froze, not because she wasn't happy to see him, but because of how unprepared she felt in that skirt. She wasn't expecting anyone, let alone Ethan. For a second, time slowed. Ethan's eyes caught hers, then dropped briefly, almost unconsciously. Noticing her outfit, he blinked, quickly lifting his gaze back to her face. The smile on his lips stayed, but his expression held a flicker of surprise. Samantha felt her cheeks grow warm. She wasn't used to being looked at that way, especially not by him. She cleared her throat and set her glass down. "Ethan, you should have told me you were coming." "You scared me." He shrugged, stepping farther into the room, the sunlight catching in his hair. "I wanted to surprise you. I thought you'd like it." His voice was casual, but there was a new note in it, something Samantha hadn't noticed before. She forced a smile, walking toward him, trying to act natural. "Well, you did surprise me, but it's good to see you." She hugged him quickly, then stepped back. Hoping the awkward moment would pass, Ethan dropped his backpack by the couch and looked around the living room as though trying to ease the tension himself. "The place looks the same," he said. "Feels like I never left." Samantha nodded, brushing her hair behind her ear. "I try to keep it that way. Something about familiarity makes a house feel like home." She wanted to sound calm, but her voice betrayed the faint tremor in her chest. Ethan sat down on the couch, stretching after his long drive. Samantha stayed standing for a moment, not sure what to do. She felt exposed in her skirt, but also strangely alive. She hadn't expected to feel this way, not from something so simple. She reminded herself this was Ethan, her nephew. She had known him since he was little. But he wasn't little anymore. He was grown confident, carried himself like a man who had stepped into a new world. "So," he said, looking up at her, "what were you doing before I barged in?" She laughed lightly, trying to hide the nerves that hummed beneath her skin. "Honestly, just enjoying the quiet. I wasn't expecting company today." Double quotes, his eyes softened. "Well, now you've got company. Hope that's okay?" Her heart eased at his words. The awkwardness was fading, replaced by warmth. She sat down across from him, crossing her legs carefully, trying not to think too much about how she looked. They talked about his classes, his professors, and his friends. Samantha listened, smiling at his energy, his stories, and the way he spoke about the future. But in the back of her mind, the moment when he first walked in replayed again and again. The way he had paused, the way his eyes had widened. It wasn't anything inappropriate, just a brief reaction, but it lingered in her thoughts. She told herself it was nothing, yet her heart whispered otherwise. As the sun dipped lower, her conversation continued, laughter filling the room. On the surface, it felt normal, on aunt and her nephew catching up after months apart. But underneath, something had shifted. It was subtle, unspoken, but undeniable. Samantha felt it. Ethan felt it. Neither of them said a word about it. But silence often speaks louder than voices. When Ethan finally leaned back, Sighing, Samantha caught herself watching him longer than she should have. She quickly looked away, standing to refill her glass of iced tea. Her hand trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. The air in the house had changed. It wasn't just warm because of summer anymore. It was warm because of something they couldn't name, and though neither of them admitted it, they both knew deep inside. That unplanned moment at the doorway had opened a new chapter neither expected. The evening settled over the small town with a quiet calm. Samantha turned on a single lamp in the living room, filling the space with a warm golden glow. The day's awkward beginning still lingered in her thoughts, but she forced herself to act normal. Ethan had surprised her by showing up, and now she wanted to be the good host, the one who made him feel welcome after his long drive. She brought out a plate of snacks and set them on the table. Ethan thanked her, his voice soft, almost grateful in a way that touched her. He leaned back on the couch, looking comfortable, but his eyes followed her movements. She tried not to notice, but the awareness clung to her. He wasn't a boy anymore. The tall, confident young man in front of her was different from the kid who used to run around her yard. That difference unsettled her. But it also stirred something she couldn't easily name. They started talking about his classes. Ethan's words flowed quickly at stories about professors, the struggle of keeping up with deadlines, and the laughter he shared with friends. His voice carried both exhaustion and excitement, the sound of someone carving out his place in the world. Samantha listened carefully, her eyes softening as he spoke. She felt proud, but at the same time, she felt an ache, a reminder of time slipping past. At one point, Ethan laughed and said, "You know, Aunt Sam, I miss your cooking. College food is nothing like home." She chuckled, shaking her head. "Don't flatter me. You just miss real meals, that's all." But the smile lingered on her lips longer than usual. His simple words carried warmth. He wasn't saying it to charm her. He meant it. She could see the truth in his expression, and it made her feel important in a way she hadn't in a long time. The conversation drifted from school to his life outside of it. He shared bits about his friends, how some relationships had faded and others had grown. Samantha asked questions, genuinely curious, though part of her simply enjoyed hearing him talk. His voice filled the quiet house like music. She realized how lonely it had been before he arrived. For a brief moment, silence settled. Ethan's gaze lingered on her, steady, thoughtful. Samantha felt her heartbeat quicken under that gaze. She shifted in her seat, trying to break the moment. But he spoke first. "You look different tonight," he said, his tone careful, as if he wasn't sure he should say it. Samantha froze. Her mind flashed back to the skirt, to the awkward pause when he first walked in. She swallowed, forcing a laugh. "Different? Well, maybe that's just age catching up with me." But Ethan shook his head. "No, that's not what I mean. You look happy, lighter, like you're yourself again." Her chest tightened at his words. She wasn't used to being noticed like that. Most people only saw her as dependable, practical, the one who kept things steady. But Ethan had seen something else, something beneath the surface. She didn't know how to respond, so she lowered her eyes, pretending to adjust the plate on the table. He didn't press her, but his words lingered in the air. They carried a weight she couldn't ignore. Trying to steer the moment back, she asked, "So, are you seeing anyone? A special someone at college?" Ethan hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Not really. I tried once or twice, but it never felt right. People my age, I don't know. They feel temporary, like they don't really see beyond the surface." Samantha tilted her head, curious. "And what do you want them to see?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his voice low but steady. "I want someone to see me for who I am, not just for my age or how I look. Someone who makes me feel like I matter." Her breath caught. The way he said it, the way his eyes met hers, it felt personal, as though he was speaking directly to her, not about some nameless girl. She looked away, her hands tightening around her glass. Her heart whispered dangerous thoughts, but her mind tried to silence them. The air between them grew heavier, but not uncomfortable. It was filled with something unspoken, something neither dared to name. Samantha stood up quickly, needing to move, to break the moment before it grew too deep. She walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside, staring out at the fading light. Behind her, Ethan's voice softened. "I'm glad I came here. I didn't realize how much I missed this. Missed you." She closed her eyes, the words hitting harder than she expected. She wanted to remind herself that she was his aunt, that boundaries mattered. But the way he said "missed you" touched a place inside her that had been quiet for too long. She turned back, managing a small smile. "I'm glad you came too. The house feels less empty with you here." Ethan's eyes lit up, his expression warm, almost relieved. That look unsettled her again, because it wasn't the look of a boy toward an Antite, was the look of a man who felt connected. The morning light poured into the kitchen, soft and golden, touching every corner of the room. Samantha stood by the stove, flipping eggs onto a plate. She told herself to stay calm, to keep things simple. Last night's conversation still echoed in her mind. Every glance and every word circling in her chest like a secret she didn't want to admit. She focused on the pan, the sound of sizzling butter, the smell of toast. Routine kept her steady, or at least that's what she hoped. Ethan's footsteps came down the hallway, slow but sure. She felt them before she heard them. He walked in wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans, his hair slightly messy from sleep. He greeted her with a soft morning, his voice gentle in the quiet kitchen. She didn't turn immediately, afraid her face might reveal more than she wanted. Instead, she forced a light tone. "Morning. Breakfast is ready. Sit down before it gets cold." He smiled, pulling out a chair at the small wooden table. Samantha placed the plate in front of him, then sat across from him with her own. For a while they ate in silence, the clink of forks the only sound. But silence wasn't enough to drown out the weight in the air. Halfway through, Ethan set down his fork. His eyes stayed on her, steady, searching. "Aunt Sam, can I say something without it sounding strange?" Her hand froze on the glass of juice. She looked at him carefully, trying to read his face. "That depends," she said with a nervous smile. He leaned forward, his voice lower now. "You've always been the person I look up to. You're strong, kind, and you never let anyone see when you're hurting. But I wonder, do you know how much you mean to me?" The words landed like a stone in her chest. Her first instinct was to laugh it off, to tease him, to remind him she was his aunt and nothing more. But the way he said it, earnest, vulnerable, made her heart ache. She saw sincerity in his eyes, the kind that couldn't be brushed aside. She looked down, fiddling with her napkin. "Ethan, you don't have to say things like that. You're young, and I'm not saying it because I'm young," he interrupted gently. "I'm saying it because it's true. You've been there for me more than anyone else. And sometimes I feel like you don't see how special you are." Her throat tightened. No one had spoken to her like that in years. She had lived with responsibilities, expectations, and quiet sacrifices. But rarely was someone reminding her of her worth. She wanted to tell him to stop, to protect them both from what was forming between the lines of his words. But her heart betrayed her, racing at the sound of his voice. She pushed her plate aside and stood quickly, walking to the sink. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered, her back turned. She hoped her voice sounded stronger than she felt. Ethan didn't move right away. He stayed seated, watching her shoulders tense as she washed dishes that didn't need washing. Finally, he rose and stepped closer, careful not to invade her space, but close enough that she felt his presence. "I don't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said softly. I don't want you to think you're invisible, because you're not. Not to me." The words broke through her defenses. She gripped the edge of the counter, staring at the water running into the sink, her heart battling between reason and feeling. She knew what the world would say, knew what boundaries existed. But the part of her that had longed for connection, for warmth, couldn't ignore the truth in his voice. She turned slightly, her eyes catching his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The kitchen was quiet, but the silence carried more weight than any words could. She saw the admiration in his eyes, the unspoken longing he tried to hide. She felt her own reflection in it, something she had tried to bury, something now rising to the surface. Breaking the gaze, she grabbed a towel and dried her hands. Ethan, you're going to make a wonderful partner someday. You'll meet someone who sees all of that in you. But it can't be me. It can't ever be me. Her voice cracked on the last word. Betraying the struggle inside her, he nodded slowly, his jaw tight, his eyes shining with emotions he didn't release. I know, he whispered. I know it's complicated. But I needed you to know how I feel. Her heart twisted. She wanted to comfort him, to take his pain away. But she knew comforting him too much would blur lines they couldn't afford to cross. She stepped back, creating distance, forcing herself to breathe. The rest of the morning passed in fragments. They cleaned up quietly, each lost in thought. Samantha moved about the house with restless energy. Dusting shelves that didn't need dusting, adjusting frames that had hung straight for years. Ethan offered to help, but she waved him off, needing space to collect herself. Later, she stepped into the garden, the cool breeze brushing against her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the flowers she had planted long ago. They had grown tall, blooming in colors that reminded her of time passing, of seasons she couldn't hold on to. Behind her, she heard Ethan's footsteps again, steady, slow. He stopped a few feet away, giving her room. I didn't mean to make things harder for you, he said quietly. I just wanted to be honest. She closed her eyes, the ache in her chest deepening. Some truths are too heavy. Ethan, sometimes silence is kinder, but silence doesn't change what's real, he replied. His voice calm, but firm. She turned then, facing him fully. His expression was open, raw, carrying emotions that scared her with their clarity. She wanted to deny what she saw, to remind him of their roles, but the words caught in her throat. Because the truth was, she felt it too, the spark, the connection, the pull she couldn't explain. Her eyes softened, and for a moment she almost reached out, almost let herself forget the world and its rules. But she stopped, pulling her hand back. We can't, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Ethan nodded, his shoulders heavy, but his gaze never wavered. I understand, but you'll always matter to me. More than you know. The weight of his words hung between them, heavier than the breeze. Samantha turned back to the garden, her heart racing, her mind torn. She knew what was right, but she also knew that something had been awakened inside, hers, something she could no longer ignore. The sun climbed higher, casting shadows across the yard. Neither of them spoke again. Their silence said everything. Something had changed forever. The sun was setting, painting the sky with orange and pink streaks. Samantha stood near the window, her arms wrapped around herself. The whole day had felt like a storm inside her chest, every word. Every glance, every silence between her and Ethan had carried weight. She stared outside at the quiet street, but her mind was not quiet at all. It was loud with questions, fears, and feelings she had no name for. She wished the sunset could erase everything. But instead, it only deepened the ache in her heart. Behind her, the house was silent. Ethan had kept to himself for most of the afternoon, giving her space, maybe sensing she needed time. But silence didn't erase what had already been spoken. His words from the morning replayed again and again. You mean so much to me. She had tried to bury them, but they stayed alive. Pressing against her chest like a secret she couldn't shake, the sound of soft footsteps broke her thoughts. Ethan entered the room slowly, as though unsure if he should. Samantha didn't turn around right away. She kept her eyes on the fading sun, hoping he wouldn't see the conflict written all over her face. Aunt Sam, he said gently, his voice almost a whisper. Are you okay? She drew a breath, steady but trembling inside. I don't know, she admitted. It was the truth. She didn't know how to feel, what to think, or what to do. Ethan stepped closer but stopped halfway, leaving space between them. I didn't mean to hurt you. I couldn't keep it in anymore. Her throat tightened. She finally turned, her eyes meeting his. His face was calm, but his eyes held everything he wasn't saying aloud. She saw care, respect, and something deeper. Something that scared her because it was reflected in her own heart. You're young, she said softly, forcing her voice to be steady. You have a whole life ahead of you. I can't let my loneliness or my feelings confuse you. It wouldn't be fair. Ethan shook his head. It's not confusion. I know what I feel. And I know what you mean to me. It doesn't matter how much life I still have ahead of me. I've never felt this kind of connection with anyone before. Her chest tightened at his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let her heart rest in the warmth of his honesty. But reason screamed louder. She walked a few steps away, putting distance between them, and pressed her hand to the window glass. The cool surface grounded her. Ethan. Sometimes lover, what feels like lover, arrives at the wrong time, in the wrong way. That doesn't make it less real, but it makes it dangerous. If we let ourselves go down this path, we could ruin everything. We could ruin us. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with pain neither of them wanted to face. Ethan finally whispered, "So what are you saying? That we just pretend none of this happened?" She turned back to him, tears glistening in her eyes, though she held them back with all her strength. "I'm saying the kindest thing we can do for you, for me, for our families, to step back. To protect what we already have. Because even if my heart wants more, I know it can't be more. It wouldn't survive the world outside these walls." Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes wet but steady. He looked like he wanted to argue, to fight against her words, but instead, he simply nodded. His silence carrying more heartbreak than any words could. Samantha took a step toward him, her Han,